When the barricade shifted, Michael saw it before security did. He held the mic low and raised his other hand. The band cut on beat 4. What happened next wasn't in the show plan. The night started clean. 82,000 people filled the open-air stadium, and the sound check ran without a hitch. Michael walked the stage perimeter twice during setup, checking sight lines and asking the lighting crew to soften the front spots so fans in the pit wouldn't get blinded. He always did that. Walked the venue, touched the equipment, looked at the crowd space like he was responsible for every square foot of it. The head of venue security, a man named Garrett with 20 years in arena management, watched from the tunnel and figured this was routine caution. He didn't know Michael had already spotted something nobody else noticed. Garrett had worked hundreds of shows, rock acts, pop tours, sporting events. He'd seen performers who stayed in their dressing rooms until showtime, and performers who made quick stage walks for good luck. Michael was different. He moved like someone reading a blueprint in real time, pausing at every crowd control point, asking questions that venue crews didn't expect. How many exits on the north side? What's the protocol if someone faints in the center pit? Garrett answered each one, professional and patient, but inside he was recalculating. This wasn't a nervous performer. This was someone running a mental checklist that most artists didn't know existed. The barricade separating the pit from the stage was a standard modular setup. 8-foot steel panels bolted together, anchored with sandbag ballast every 12 feet. Standard, but not new. The paint was chipped in places, and one of the lower crossbars on the center section had a visible bend. Michael crouched near it during the walkthrough and ran his hand along the base. The sand in the nearest bag shifted under his palm. He looked up at Garrett. This one's light. Garrett pulled out his tablet and checked the manifest. Ballast meets venue code, 40 pounds per anchor point. Inspected this morning. He said it with confidence, the tone of someone who'd filed 1,000 safety reports and never had an incident. Michael didn't argue. He just ran his thumb along the bent crossbar, feeling where the metal had fatigued, then stood up and brushed the dust off his hands. "Okay," he said quietly. Garrett took that as acceptance and moved on to the next item on his pre-show checklist. He didn't notice that Michael's eyes kept drifting back to that center panel every time he crossed the stage. 20 minutes before doors opened, Michael found his stage manager, a woman named Carol, who'd been with him for 3 tours, near the monitor console. She was running through cue sheets with the lighting director, a headset slung around her neck, 2 radios clipped to her belt. Michael waited until she finished her sentence, then stepped close enough that the lighting director couldn't hear. Keep a runner near the pit during the first 4 songs. Carol looked at him, reading his expression the way she'd learned to over 37 shows in 4 countries. "What am I watching for?" "The center barricade panel. If it moves more than a few inches, we stop." She didn't ask why. She didn't question the call or suggest he was being overcautious. She just keyed her radio and told one of the production assistants, a young guy named Eli, who usually managed backstage traffic, to position himself stage left with a clear view of the pit line. Eli acknowledged and moved into place without asking for an explanation. That was the kind of crew Michael worked with. They trusted his instincts because his instincts had kept people safe for over a decade. The show opened with a pre-recorded intro. Then a hydraulic lift brought Michael up through center stage in a column of white light. The roar was immediate. 82,000 voices hitting a single sustained note that made the air feel solid. He landed the opening pose, held it for 3 beats, and the band kicked in. The first song was up-tempo, high-energy choreography, with 6 backup dancers flanking him in sharp formation. The crowd surged forward on the chorus. That's normal. Front rows always push during the big moments. But Michael saw the center barricade panel flex. Just a few inches, then back, like a guitar string under tension, vibrating, but holding. Garrett's crew had 4 guards stationed along the pit line, but they were focused on crowd control, watching for fainters and stopping hands from grabbing at the stage. Nobody was watching the structure itself. Michael hit his next mark, spun into the bridge choreography, and his eyes tracked the panel on the turn. The flex happened again. 2 inches inward, then a slow return. The math started running in his head. Crowd density, surge velocity, structural fatigue. He'd seen a barricade collapse once, years ago at a festival in Europe. Not his show, but he'd been backstage when the medics carried people out. He remembered the sound it made, the metal shriek, and the sudden shift in crowd noise, from excitement to panic. He finished the first song, hit the final pose, and used the applause to take 3 steps closer to stage edge. The panel flexed again, 3 inches this time. Second song. The tempo dropped into a mid-tempo groove, and Michael moved to stage left for a solo spotlight section. The pit crowd relaxed slightly, redistributing weight. The barricade settled. Michael kept his mark, hit every cue, but his eyes tracked that center panel every 8 bars. Carol stood in the wings with her headset on, watching him watch the crowd. She'd worked enough shows to recognize the difference between performance focus and problem focus. Performance focus was smooth, eyes forward, body flowing through choreography like water. Problem focus had a slight hitch, a micro pause between moves where Michael's attention split into 2 channels, one for the audience, one for whatever he'd flagged as a concern. She keyed her mic. "You need anything?" Michael touched his ear monitor once, their signal for standby. "Not yes, not no, just I'm watching something. Stay ready." Carol turned to Eli, who was standing 10 feet away with his eyes locked on the pit. "You see anything unusual?" Eli shook his head. "Crowd's normal. No fainters. No fights. Everyone's just dancing." "Keep watching," Carol said. She didn't tell him what to watch for because she didn't know yet. But if Michael had flagged it, it mattered. The second song ended. Michael took a quick sip from a water bottle that one of the backup dancers handed him, then moved into position for the third song. This one was faster, harder, built for maximum impact. Carol saw him take a breath, the kind you take before a heavy lift, and she knew. Whatever he was worried about was about to get tested. Third song built into a hard-driving beat, with a jump sequence choreographed for maximum crowd response. The dancers hit their marks. Michael launched into the routine, and the pit exploded. Everyone in the front 20 rows tried to move forward at the same time. The barricade flexed again, but this time it didn't bounce back all the way. The center panel tilted 3 degrees inward, and the left anchor point lifted a half-inch off the deck. Michael saw it mid-spin. He finished the turn, planted his feet at center stage, and raised his left hand, palm out, fingers spread. The band missed it for 2 beats. The drummer caught it first and pulled back, then bass, then keys. By beat 4, the stage was silent, except for the crowd noise, which took another 5 seconds to collapse into confused murmuring. 82,000 people went from full roar to near silence because one hand went up. Eli's voice came through Carol's headset, urgent but controlled. The panel just moved. Left anchor lifted. Carol keyed her radio to the security channel. Michael called a stop. "We need the barricade checked right now." Garrett's voice came back, static-edged. "Copy. What's the issue?" He called it. "Check the center panel." Garrett grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the pit at a jog. 2 security guards moved with him, still not seeing the issue. The crowd looked fine from their angle, packed tight, but not dangerously so. No visible distress, just confusion about why the music had stopped. Michael stood center stage, mic down, and pointed directly at the bent crossbar. That's when Garrett saw it, the panel leaning inward, the lifted anchor, the sandbag ballast sagging to one side. His stomach dropped. If the next song hit, and the crowd surged again, the whole section could fold. Everyone behind it would either pour forward onto the stage deck or get crushed against the secondary barrier. Garrett had been in venue management long enough to know what a crush event looked like in the first 30 seconds. The ripple effect, the screaming, the people on the ground. He'd read the incident reports from Hillsborough, from Roskilde, from that festival in Germany, where the barricades failed, and 12 people died. Those reports lived in a folder on his desk, required reading for his team. Now he was looking at the first frame of one of those reports, frozen in real time, preventable if they moved fast. He called for a full pit hold, and waved 2 more guards over. His voice on the radio was clipped, professional. But Carol could hear the edge underneath. We need hydraulic jacks and reinforcement clamps. Now, center panel, stage left. One of the younger guards, a guy named Torres, who'd been on Garrett's team for 6 months, looked at the panel and then at Garrett. It's only tilted a little. Do we really need to stop the whole show? Garrett turned to him, and his voice went flat. Look at the crowd behind that panel. See how tight they're packed. If it folds, they go forward. 300 people, minimum. Half of them end up on the deck. The other half get crushed, trying not to fall. We stop now, or we spend the next 6 hours filling out incident reports and calling families. Your choice. Torres shut up and moved into position. The crowd didn't understand what was happening. Some people thought it was part of the show, a dramatic pause, maybe a surprise guest about to come out. Others started shouting questions toward the stage, voices overlapping into a low roar of confusion. A few scattered boos came from the back sections, people who'd paid for tickets and didn't appreciate the interruption. Michael raised the mic and spoke in a calm, level tone that carried across the PA. We're going to take a quick break. Everyone stay where you are. Don't push forward. Just give us a minute. His voice wasn't apologetic or dramatic. It was the same tone you'd use to tell someone their car had a flat tire, something that needed fixing. Not a crisis, just a pause in the plan. The crowd settled, not completely quiet, but the agitation dropped. People stopped pushing. A woman near the front barricade, close enough to see the panel tilt, turned to her friend and said, I think something's wrong with the fence. Her friend looked, didn't see it, and shrugged. But the woman kept watching, and she took 2 steps back, pulling her friend with her. 3 other people nearby saw her move and did the same. Small adjustments, instinctive, the kind of micro-decisions that ripple through a crowd without anyone realizing it's happening. Garrett's crew moved in with hydraulic jacks and reinforcement clamps. 2 guys in high-vis vests crouched at the base of the panel, assessing the anchor points. One of them radioed back to the equipment truck for replacement ballast bags. 60 pounds each, 4 needed. It took 4 minutes to stabilize the panel and replace the ballast. 4 minutes of 82,000 people standing in a stadium, watching stage crew work under bright white work lights while Michael stood in the spotlight, not leaving. He didn't pace or check his watch, he just waited. At the 2-minute mark, Carol's headset crackled. One of the backup dancers, a woman named Shanice, who'd been touring with Michael for 5 years, keyed into the crew channel. Is he okay? Does he need water? Carol glanced at Michael, standing still under the lights, sweat starting to cool on his skin. He's fine. Just stay ready. Shanice acknowledged and stayed in position, along with the other 5 dancers, all of them waiting in the wings, like athletes in a paused game. Nobody complained. Nobody asked how much longer. They just waited, because that's what professionals do when the person running the show makes a call. Carol's voice came through his ear monitor. We're clear. Panels locked. Michael nodded once, then turned toward the band and raised his hand again. This time, in a start cue. The drummer counted in, and the 4th song launched without any preamble. The crowd erupted, louder than before, like the interruption had been a pressure valve. Michael moved through the choreography with the same precision he'd shown in the first 3 songs, but now Carol could see his shoulders drop half an inch, a tiny release of tension that nobody in the audience would catch. The rest of the show ran clean. No more stops, no more flex in the barricade. Garrett stationed 2 extra guards on the pit line and checked the panel between every song. At the end of the night, after the final bow, Michael walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at the spot where the barricade had shifted. He stood there for 10 seconds, then turned and walked off. Backstage, Garrett found him in the dressing corridor 20 minutes after the final bow. Michael was still in full stage outfit, toweling sweat off his face, the fedora from the closing number sitting on a chair beside him. Garrett started to say something. Maybe a thank you. Maybe an apology for the ballast oversight. But Michael cut him off with a head shake. It's fixed now. That's what matters. Garrett tried again, the words coming out heavier than he intended. If you hadn't seen it. If you'd waited one more song. Michael interrupted, quieter this time, and there was no drama in his voice. No wait, just a simple statement of fact. But I did, so we handled it. He slung the towel over his shoulder and started toward his dressing room. Garrett stood in the hallway for a moment, watching him walk away, and felt something shift in his understanding of what a performer's job actually was. He'd worked with headliners who treated the stage like their personal kingdom, who threw tantrums over lighting cues, and demanded specific brands of water in their dressing rooms. He'd worked with acts who never even looked at the venue layout, who showed up 10 minutes before doors and expected everyone else to handle the details. Michael wasn't either of those. He was something Garrett didn't have a category for, someone who performed at the highest level and still treated the safety infrastructure like it was his personal responsibility. Carol walked with Michael, pulling off her headset and clipping it to her belt. She'd been quiet since the barricade stop, watching him move through the rest of the show with the same precision he always had. No visible sign that he'd just called a halt in front of 82,000 people. Now, in the corridor with the stage noise fading behind them, she asked the question she'd been holding for 2 hours. When did you spot it? During sound check. Michael nodded, wiping his face one more time before dropping the towel on an equipment case. The crossbar was already bent, and the ballast felt light. I wasn't sure it would be a problem, but I kept watching. Why didn't you push harder when Garrett checked the manifest? Michael stopped walking and looked at her. His expression was calm, thoughtful, the same look he had when he was working out choreography or adjusting a harmony line. Because I wasn't sure. I just had a feeling. If I'd made a big deal and been wrong, we'd have wasted an hour and looked paranoid. But I kept watching, and when I was sure, I made the call. Carol asked the question she wasn't sure she wanted. Answered, what would have happened if you'd waited another song? Michael didn't answer that one. He just looked at her for a moment, then turned and continued down the hallway. Carol stood there, listening to his footsteps fade, and thought about the math he'd been running in his head while performing choreography at 120 beats per minute. She thought about the families who would have gotten phone calls if that panel had folded. She thought about the fact that Michael had absorbed all of that calculation, made the decision, and moved on without needing recognition or reassurance. That was the part that made her recalibrate everything she thought she knew about leadership under pressure. The panel issue never made the news. No fans were injured. No lawsuits filed. No dramatic headlines about a near disaster averted. Garrett filed an internal incident report citing preventive safety hold, initiated by performer, and the venue replaced all barricade ballast before the next event. The report went into a database that venue managers across the country accessed for best practice updates, but Michael's name wasn't in the headline. Just incident type, structural concern, resolution immediate hold and repair, outcome, no injuries. A handful of people in the pit posted on early internet fan forums about the mid-show stop. One person wrote, Michael stopped the show for like 4 minutes, not sure why, maybe a technical issue. Another replied, I think something was wrong with the speakers. I saw crew guys working on something near the front. A third person chimed in, nah. He stopped because the crowd was getting too intense. Very professional. Nobody mentioned the barricade. Nobody saw what Michael saw, because from the crowd side it looked like routine stage crew activity. Just people moving equipment under bright work lights while the show was on hold. Carol kept a copy of the incident report in her tour files, not because it was dramatic, but because it was typical. One of a dozen quiet judgment calls Michael made on any given night that nobody in the audience ever registered as decisions. She had a folder labeled near misses that contained 7 other reports from that tour alone. A lighting truss that had a loose bolt and got flagged during sound check. A backup generator that failed its load test and got replaced before doors. A catering setup that was too close to an emergency exit and got moved after Michael walked the backstage area. None of these were dramatic. None of them made headlines. They were just the invisible scaffolding that held up a show that looked effortless from the audience side. 2 days later, the tour moved to the next city. During soundcheck, Michael walked the barricade line again. This venue used concrete jersey barriers, with chain-link fencing, much heavier and more stable than modular steel panels. He ran his hand along the base of the barriers anyway, checking for gaps or loose anchors. The new venue's security director, a woman named Patricia with a background in civil engineering, watched from the tunnel and asked Carol if this was standard procedure. For him, yes. Patricia watched Michael crouch near one of the barrier joints, running his fingers along the bolt connections, then stand and move to the next section. Does he have a background in stage safety or engineering? Carol smiled, a small expression that didn't quite reach tired. No, he just pays attention. Patricia nodded slowly, making a mental note. She'd worked venues for 15 years, and had seen exactly 2 performers do anything close to this level of walkthrough. Most artists never left their dressing rooms until showtime. Some did a quick sound check and disappeared. Michael was out here touching every surface like he was personally liable for every person in the building. That night's show ran without incident. The crowd was smaller, 60,000 instead of 82, but the energy was just as intense. Michael hit every mark. The band stayed locked, and the barricades didn't move. Nobody in the venue knew they were experiencing a completely smooth show, because someone had spent 15 minutes walking a fence line and checking anchor points hours before doors opened. At the end of the night, Michael took his final bow and walked off stage without looking back at the pit. Carol waited for him in the wings, holding his water bottle and a towel. He took both, drank half the bottle in one pull, and asked her how the sightlines looked from the tech booth. They were clean. He nodded and headed toward the dressing room. She watched him go and thought about the barricade incident 2 nights earlier. The hand signal, the stop, the 4-minute hold that prevented an injury count. Nobody would ever have to calculate. She thought about how many other nights had gone smoothly, because Michael had spotted something in advance, adjusted something before it became a problem, made a quiet call that never reached the audience's awareness. The math on that was impossible to track, but Carol had been doing this long enough to know the pattern. Prevention doesn't leave evidence. It just leaves a string of nights where nothing went wrong. Years later, after Michael had passed, and Carol had moved into venue design consulting, she gave a talk at a production safety conference. Someone in the audience asked her about the most important lesson she'd learned in live event management. She thought about it for a moment, then told the story of the barricade stop, the hand signal, the 4-minute hold, the 82,000 people who never knew they'd been 30 seconds away from a crush incident. She described the way Michael had stood on stage during the repair, not leaving, not performing, just being present, so the crowd stayed calm. She talked about the post-show conversation in the hallway, the quiet insistence that fixing the problem mattered more than assigning blame. When she finished, someone asked if she thought Michael had overreacted. Carol looked at the person and said, "A panel that's tilting 3 degrees under normal surge is going to fold completely under panic surge." He didn't overreact. He read the physics and made the call before the math got ugly. The barricade from that show was decommissioned 6 months later during a routine equipment audit. The bent crossbar and light ballast were flagged in an inspection report, and the entire panel set was replaced. The venue kept no record of the near incident, just a maintenance log entry noting wear and tear replacement. Nobody connected it to the mid-show stop from months earlier. The fans who were in the pit that night remember the pause, but most of them remember it as a brief technical issue, maybe a sound glitch or a missed cue. A few remember Michael's raised hand and the way the entire band stopped on the same beat. Almost none of them remember the barricade repair, because from the crowd side it looked like routine stage crew activity. Just people moving equipment under bright work lights while the show was on hold. But for the people standing directly behind that center panel, the ones pressed up against the steel, with the full weight of the pit behind them, the stop was the difference between walking out of the venue tired and happy versus being carried out on gurneys. They didn't know that, and they never would, because the incident they avoided doesn't leave evidence. It just leaves a moment. A hand signal, a 4-minute pause, a decision made under a spotlight in front of 82,000 people who thought they were watching a performance when they were actually watching a crisis get quietly erased before it could begin. Michael never talked about it in interviews. He never mentioned the barricade, the stop, the call he made, or the math he ran in his head while spinning through choreography at 120 beats per minute. If someone had asked him about it directly, he probably would have said the same thing he told Garrett backstage. It's fixed now. That's what matters. Because for him, the stop wasn't a dramatic moment or a headline-worthy intervention. It was just part of the job. The part nobody sees, the part that doesn't make the highlight reel, the part that only matters when it doesn't happen. The arena still hosts concerts. The pit still fills with fans pressing toward the stage, the barricades still hold. And somewhere in the venue's maintenance logs, buried under years of routine inspections and equipment replacements, there's a single-line entry from that night: mid-show safety hold, panel reinforced, no injuries. 4 words that summarize a moment most people never knew happened, but Carol knows, Garrett knows, and the handful of crew members who were standing in the wings when Michael raised his hand and stopped the show know. They know what didn't happen that night. And that's the part worth remembering.